So welcome, Jane, to the Apprenticeship Podcast. Thanks for coming on. How's your day been today?
Yeah, it's been a good day today. Nice and steady today, not too hectic.
Good stuff. That's what we like to hear. So to start off with, do you want to give a little bit of an intro about yourself? What you're kind of working on? What's your role? What you're obviously in the apprenticeship space, so it'd be good to learn a bit more about what you work on and what programs you're involved
Yeah,
with.
sure, fantastic. Yeah, I'm got quite a sort of a broad, wide experience really within the apprenticeship space. I mean, I first got involved in apprenticeships back in 2008, where I worked for a private training provider, working as an assessor, and then worked sort of through the operational management structure of the company. Before I left that company in 2019, I was operational delivery manager sort of across England, looking predominantly at the early years and health and social care sectors, levels 2 to 5. So there was just sort of that was a very busy sort of hectic role in there. And then in 2019, I moved into the endpoint assessment area, completely sort of moved to the different side and was responsible for sort of setting up an EPAO. I was the quality and compliance manager there. That involved writing an off-qual application and ROEPAO applications, and just setting the company up really from sort of scratch and looking at the different assessment plans and what made a valid and reliable assessment. And then more recently, I've moved sort of back into the training side of things, and I now work for a HEI as their head of apprenticeships. So my role really is to oversee the operational delivery of degree apprenticeships here at the university, and making sure that they're compliant and working with the teaching and delivery teams. And I have a couple of guys that are with me that sort of look at sort of the progress review side of things. So yeah, about 14 years of being in the apprenticeship space and working through the various changes and challenges that are thrown and thrown at us from one side or the other, and I'm still here, so I clearly am evidence that it can work and that it's an enjoyable place to be.
Yeah, nice. No, I'm glad you still are here. I'm glad we're talking today, and I think I'm fairly young in the apprenticeship space. I would say. I suppose I've only really been in it for maybe around 4 or 5 years, which was obviously that was after the most recent, after the levy came in. So I only know post levy world, working
Yeah.
degree apprenticeships. And I think I was just saying, we were chatting earlier. Yeah, I don't envy yourself and your colleagues who have to deal with all the compliance and regulatory bits and pieces around apprenticeships, because I'm more on the academic side, although I'm aware of all of that. Fortunately, I don't have to deal with all of that. Although endpoint assessments I'm sure we'll have a bit of a chat about that. That's something that's on my mind at the moment on our program, so the Level 6 Digital Technology Solutions Professional Program. It's an integrated EPA, which has its own
Uh-huh.
peculiarities, because we effectively we are the EPAO, and we run the EPA, but we have to demonstrate independence.
Yeah.
And that means essentially, we're in the process of refining and improving that. We need to bring in independent people to kind of work for the university to run those EPAs. And I think we're kind of in the I'm sure I'll pick your brains on this. Defining that separation between myself, program lead, for example, I really need to kind of stay away from that, because kind of conflict of interest and
Yeah.
ensuring independence. So we're kind of that's almost at the top of my list at the moment. So I'm sure we'll have more to talk about EPAs. One thing I wanted to pick up on is your experience is what sounds sort of fascinating, coming from the kind of, I think you said, like from level 2 through to level 5 kind of programs, and now you're in sort of HEI. So in your HEI context, are you running level 6 programs, level 7 programs as well?
There's two level 6 programs and a level 7 program running at the moment, and a very extensive growth plan as well to bring further programs on as well. So yeah, we've been running those now for a couple of years, and they're very, very successful, and they're sitting as part of the portfolio nicely as well. They don't sort of, that the current portfolio, they're sitting within that space nicely. It can be delivered for the academics. It's comfortable for them, is what I'm trying to say, that it's been an easy transition for them to understand how that applies.
That's good. Yeah, that's important, isn't it? I think if we say traditional career academics, I think doing apprenticeships right, it can be quite a big shift, right? Because it's not just a program delivered to those that are in a job. There's lots of those other layers, aren't there? So that can be tough. What kind of programs are they? Are they business, technical?
Yeah, so they're business. Yeah, they're business related. So at the moment we've got the senior leader level 7.
Okay.
We started out with version 1 of that standard, so it was the senior leader with the masters. So we've got both versions running of that at the moment. Our first cohort about to go through EPA at the moment, which is daunting and exciting at the same time. And then there's the Chartered Manager degree, which is the level 6. And then we also deliver the Career Development Professional level 6 as well, which is actually delivered slightly outside of faculty. That sits actually with our Careers Hub. So it is our existing careers advisors that work as part of the university that are delivering that apprenticeship as well. So that's what we're really quite proud of, is that our academic staff are still current practitioners, either in that they are active business owners, or in the case of that particular apprenticeship standard, they are still active careers advisors, which is great from an authenticity point of view. I found certainly in previous career, you tend to sort of work your way up through an industry, and you tend to then gain your assessor's qualification, and then you go into assessing or teaching, and then that's then when your currency starts to, you're very good at assessing, very good at teaching, but your occupational currency then starts to take a little bit of a backward step. My own, for example, I started out in the early years care sector and worked with young children for many years. And actually, when I joined the training provider and I gained my assessor's qualification, that's what I was delivering. But if you asked me now to go back into my occupational sector, I've been many, many years outside of it, but I can assess it. But how good would I be, in terms of my currency? So that's something sort of really, really important, is sort of, for people that are recruiting assessors, and regardless of the level, really, is that balance between the currency that the assessor's got, as well as their assessor's qualification, and their experience in both of that, because obviously, undoubtedly, as they get good in one, it slides off at the other end, unless they are still trying to balance being an occupational expert and assessing it at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
well, that does make a lot of sense. It's a balancing act, isn't it? I think that's the problem that I have, is that I think I got into teaching 7 or 8 years ago, and I originally came from industry. And I got into teaching because of my industry experience, and I've kind of straddled both industry and teaching ever since.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic, and I enjoy it, and I love being able to try and keep up with, modern technology, and actually still working on real projects, while also being able to feed that into my teaching and the sort of program design. But it is really tough as well. It's tiring, and balancing that is, it's really tough. But I think there's trade-offs, aren't there, both ways, that we just have to balance. How do you go about the programs that you run? Are they integrated endpoint assessments?
No, they're not integrated. So we contract with EPAOs outside, but again, sort of we were chatting just before we sort of came on here, and we were saying about integrated degrees, and actually as part of sort of some of our growth plans, some of them are integrated. So it's, again, there'll be a lot of development for us and a lot of other providers in the future where they may have a mix of particular apprenticeship standards that are both integrated and not, and quite how a business builds the structure around that to make sure that they're sort of independent. But yeah, at the moment we're very aware that one, certainly if it heads towards revision, then it's likely to come out as an integrated standard, even though it's not at the moment. So there's always lots of change and how that works. Yeah, absolutely.
That's the integrated side of things is always an interesting one, which is something we're grappling with at the moment.
Absolutely.
I think so the institution I work at, the day job as it were, Buckinghamshire New University, quite a lot of apprentices, quite a lot of programs. I think 11 or 12 programs at the moment, and a vast array of programs from different schools, and they're all different, and some are integrated, some are not, at different levels. And it's a tough kind of thing to manage. And I think it's you need, while there are general EPA best practices and things like that, often it is down to the particular standard, and if it's integrated, what are the guidelines on that? And I think the level 6 Digitech program is quite an early standard as well, that's been due for revision for the whole of COVID basically.
Right.
And because it's quite an early standard, there were some ambiguities in the assessment plan, and so we've had to kind of fill gaps, and lots of others in the sector felt those same gaps. But it's been nice that we've been able to communicate with those other organisations who are delivering to kind of reassure each other and share ideas. Which I guess flows into the whole point of maybe like this podcast, actually just sharing best practice, right? Another thing we were talking about earlier, just trying to share good practice and sort of collaboration. But one of the specific questions I wanted to ask you were there any particular lessons learned from your kind of experience on level 2 through to level 5 programs that have sort of helped in your sort of understanding and delivery and management of like these level 6 and level 7 degree apprenticeships?
I think it's really important to have a lot of really clear operating procedures in place, because I think regardless of the level of the apprenticeship, the process is the same in terms of the way in which they come on and they deliver, and certainly from my role in terms of making sure that there's, the ILR submissions and the data control and that sort of the regulatory compliance that goes around it. I think it's really important that you have a team that are cross-checking what's happening, but you've got sort of set processes in place, so you know what to do if, and you're almost planning for exactly that with your team, looking at the what if. So for example, when I was on the sort of the EPAO side of things, we would look at a document that we called the gateway considerations, and actually what might be thrown our way by a learner or their employer or their training provider at that gateway, whether it be that there's maternity there involved, or they go off sick halfway through endpoint assessment, or there's a change of employer halfway through. So I think it's really important to sort of like try and iron out and problem solve some of the what ifs, so that there's sort of a sort of strict set of processes involved, and a clear cycle of audit as well, in terms of making sure that everything fits into the right box. Because at the end of the day, the Skills Funding Agency and the Institute, their guidance is there, and it relates to every apprentice from a level 2 all the way to a level 6. It doesn't differentiate between them. So I think that would be my biggest thing, is to really iron out those processes and have those in place and make sure they're up to date with that. And going back to your previous point, I think it is about sharing best practice and collaborating with other institutions. And I think, in my experience, HEIs are a lot better at doing that. We seem to be able to partnership up with people and pick up the phone a lot more to other people to say, right, you're delivering this, how are you doing that? And have you come across this issue? Whereas my experience of having worked with another training provider and looking at those other levels, they were far more defensive and protective of their work. And that just didn't happen. There was far too much competition. You didn't share what was happening, and the data protection around everything, which obviously there needs to be to an extent. So, and certainly when I looked at the endpoint assessment side, I think there was an awful lot more collaboration there as well. As you probably found, as you were saying, with the standard that's really due for revision and probably long overdue revision. Actually, there's a lot of collaboration there where EPAOs were working together, or institutions in the case of an integrated, they were working together to, okay, are you finding the same things as us? Can we standardize that across, ourselves? Have you read that KSB the way I've read it? So I think that there needs to be a lot more of that, hence why I think this is a really nice space to be able to sort of share, what's going on and how we can sort of help each other, really, because there's a lot of space where you're not standing on other people's toes. So it's really important to do.
Yeah, and I suppose this is kind of a signal, like us waving to the community, to say that reach out and we're happy to chat. And I think as HEIs working in higher education institutions, I know we've got a couple of good relationships with the training providers that maybe run level 3, level 4 programs.
Absolutely.
Often they turn into feeders for our programs, which is fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think there's room to kind of encourage more sort of sharing of sort of best practice between those different approaches. Although inherently there are quite significant differences in an approach of degree apprenticeships than many of the level 3 and level 4, just because of the nature of the programs. But like you said, lots of similarities and standard approaches. I like the point that you mentioned there about going through the what ifs, although through Gateway, for example, but being proactive about the kind of things that not necessarily could go wrong, but the kind of curveballs that might be thrown at you, right?
Absolutely.
And just speaking practically, like, do you document those? So is that kind of documented, or is it just a case of kind of meeting together and going through it sort of verbally as a team? Sort of fascinated by that.
We do actually. Approach. Yeah, we do document it. And like probably a lot of other HEIs that have got Ofsted looming in terms of their new provider monitoring visits, we've done a lot of work on sort of our quality improvement plan, and we've made sure that actually everything that we've decided as a team or identified as part of a team that we could improve upon, we've always sort of looked at that and put it in the quality improvement plan. And then being part of a HEI, there's sort of a long structure of things where that sort of gets fed up and then fed back down. So in case you need to implement sort of anything else. But it is documented. I think it's really important to look back on where you were and what you were doing. And actually, I think it's amazing to see in what a short space of time the changes that you can make. The differences, for example, between our first ever cohort that came on a couple of years ago that are about to go through EPA now to cohort 4 or 5 that's about to start, there has been huge improvement across that, across the whole board, operationally, teaching and learning, just processes that we've put in place, from right down to sort of the social aspect of the apprenticeship that those learners are having, and what we can do and what personal development we can put in place, what systems we can use. Halfway through that, we implemented an e-portfolio system, which absolutely every HEI has got to get, because we certainly were finding that our current systems and things that were in place weren't built for apprenticeships, because apprenticeships were new to the
Yeah.
institution, so that's absolutely fine. But yeah, we just absolutely needed to have an e-portfolio. I mean, it's taken time for that to generate momentum and all the rest of it. But I think it's really important to document those sorts of things and look back on where you
Yeah.
were and keep evaluating. And we have sort of quite a robust structure of evaluation here, where we're constantly seeking feedback from our apprentices. What could we do better? Tell us, because it's really important to us to make sure that it's right for you. And sometimes there's things that you're doing that you don't realise. So, one of the biggest things that our apprentices get out of it was even just the fact that we provided them with lots of additional networking opportunities. So, as well as sort of the teaching and learning sessions, they could sit there and really talk about and share what was going on in their own workplaces and take ideas from one another. And it was something that we just allowed to happen naturally. But actually, that's been one of our biggest successes, in that those apprentices have come out and actually gone, yeah, okay, we've got, for example, some candidates that work for the NHS, and they will admit they will go to internal training, and it gets rolled out to everybody in the same way. But actually, them coming outside and doing an apprenticeship, the skills that they're learning, not just from us, but from their peers, and that they're then taking back into the workplace, is huge. That's massive. And like I say, that was just something that we were doing naturally.
Yeah.
But now that's something that we can capture and really sort of work on. So yeah, going back to your original question, John, yeah, definitely document it and look back on it, and as a team really appreciate the journey that you've been on and where you started and where you've come to.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I think that's something I know we're in a similar position. I think we're starting fifth or sixth cohort soon. We've had a couple go to EPA and come a long way. A long way. There's still a long way to go. I think reflecting on that is important. I mean, reflection itself is kind of key for apprentices' learning experience, but it is important for us as professionals trying to run the programs as well, isn't it? And I think that's
Absolutely.
something. Like you said, there's lots of good things that happen on a program. I'm a great advocate of collaborative learning, and collaborative learning that can even happen even kind of fully online, because a lot of our the digital programs that we run are pretty much online first now since COVID, and it's working really well. That's due to the demands of employers and the apprentices, really, because most of them are now in distributed remote jobs.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes sense that delivery of the apprenticeships matches that model. That we do run some face-to-face workshops to enhance the learning experience, but creating the collaborative learning experience, online lessons which aren't lectures, which I really rally against. I don't like one-way knowledge transfer during live sessions. That can happen asynchronously, and I'm always I'll go on about it every opportunity I have to go on about it. Pre-recorded videos are great for learners, and actually great for accessibility, in that they can watch them in their own time, they can watch it at their own speed, they can watch with captions. It's kind of a win-win-win-win. And then you bring it together, that you make use of live sessions, particularly online, where you can't spend as long, because it is more sort of cognitively draining to be in front of a screen. Making that count with collaborative discussion and sort of question and answer, structured discussion. And I've had some amazing kind of incidental conversations come out of that, with learners connecting with each other about particular topics and from different employers. And you can't plan it, but you can create the space for it to happen. I think that based on what you've just said, though, if, for example, you want to show that to Ofsted, off the top of my head, I wouldn't necessarily know how to capture that and show that. So that's the thing about capturing and documenting it. Maybe that comes in. Pick your brains on how you document that kind of thing. But you said you regularly get feedback from your learners, which I think is key. And again, we don't do that as well as we could do, because that's what Ofsted care about, isn't it? It's about the learner experience, and they talk to the learners. So how do you do that? Do you have a scheduled survey that goes out, or do you do interviews as well, or collecting in the academic staff sort of collecting feedback as well?
Yeah, we do. We had to do sort of quite a lot of work on this actually, because we have, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but each module has its own evaluation as well, and that's something that's across the institution. So it's quite a generic evaluation really, that really looks at the content of the module and that sort of thing. And then in addition to that, we have sort of a cycle of survey, and that sort of took sort of quite a lot of meetings with the team to look at, right, what do we want to capture, when do we want to capture it, and what sort of mechanism can we use so that actually, you know, the responses that we get are good, and we've sort of come up with that sort of cycle of survey now, that we look at it sort of immediately after they've started. So we look at the effectiveness of the onboarding processes and induction, and then we look at it really at that first progress review point at the sort of the 10 to 12 weeks. So, okay, we've got the first module sort of underway. Where are we? How do you feel? And then we sort of look at it sort of more towards the end of each academic year. And we also use a similar sort of process for employers as well, because we want to know how they're feeling about it, how involved do they feel, you know, off the job hours, which is always a topic of debate for everybody, I'm sure. So those sorts of things. So that's how we've implemented that. And then we periodically get that data and summarise it, and it goes sort of so that we've basically got a quarterly overview of all the sort of the responses that have been captured. And we can use the feedback from the module evaluations as well. And we kind of thought that that was the best way of doing it, so that they weren't over surveyed, they weren't constantly being asked, but that it was important that our learners knew that they were being listened to. And they also knew what services were available to them as well. So it's always making sure, so for example, at induction and that first 4-week survey, some of it is gathering their thoughts and opinions on it, but it's also for us, have you understood where our student advice is? Have you understood where our digital learning support centre is? Have you accessed and know where the library is yet? All those sorts of things, so that we can look at that and determine, right, okay, actually there needs to be a little bit more work at the induction stage, or it's something that we need to pick up because we've just bombarded them with so much information in those first few weeks. Do we need to then run sort of additional information sessions for them and things like that? So it helps us with our overall planning and the structure of the programs if we know at exactly what point how people are feeling. And yeah, we might sort of interview people addition to that. You know, we've got some people who will come forward off their own back and say, actually, could I give you some feedback about so and so? Yes, absolutely. Our door's always open for that. And apprenticeship forums have worked quite well as well, so that we've got nominees from each cohort that can take the feedback from their peers and then feed that back as well. And we've been making sure that we try and use an impartial person to lead those sorts of meetings, so that they are open and honest and they're telling us exactly that. You know, even just anonymising the surveys, it's something that, you know, people above me will say, well, actually, who wrote that? Well, I don't want to know who wrote that, because actually they're being more honest by us not knowing who wrote that. Yeah. So yeah, there's been quite a lot of work that's done that, and that's working quite well, and it's certainly helping us improve and inform quite a lot of things, you know, even down to big changes in terms of finance modules. And, you know, actually a lot of people highlighted delivering the finance module towards the end of the financial year. For some people that worked brilliantly, and for other people they were like, absolutely no way. How am I going to try and get additional off-the-job support around a finance module at the end of the financial year? That's not going to happen. So that enabled us to sort of have a little go back to our structure and, okay, could that module be picked up and moved or repeated somewhere else? So yeah, it's really important that feedback that we get, and then putting it into something like the improvement plan, where you're constantly monitoring that every opportunity, every meeting you've got. Right, what's happened with this? What's happened with that?
Nice.
It's good.
Yeah, no, that sounds like you've got a really sort of robust structure there. Does it do you vary it per program, or those kind of regular, those surveys that go out, are they fairly, you can roll them out fairly generically?
Yeah, it can be varied actually. Again, something that did crop up, certainly with the end of the academic year, is that again a lot of the candidates that are on the career development professional apprenticeship standard, a lot of those candidates work in schools, so they're term time only. So sending out an evaluation survey at the end of an academic year is likely to be missed by them.
Yeah.
So just sort of tailoring that and structuring that around sort of their working pattern again was far more helpful, and it increased our responses to that, which is good.
Nice.
So yeah, it can be tailored.
And I imagine do you kind of collect sort of quantitative and qualitative kind of data in those surveys, right? So like free text feedback, but also some kind of numeric data so that you can kind of track as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really important to have a balance of both qualitative and quantitative. And again, making your survey long enough that you're capturing what it is that you want to find out, but short enough that actually your response rate will be of good quality as well. I think there's nothing worse when you have an apprentice who's working full time, they've got an assignment to complete, they've got whatever else is going on in their life, and then you send them a 50-page evaluation. That's not going to go down well.
Indeed. Yeah, I know on our program we despite when it comes to the deadlines, despite the best planning in the world, well, maybe not the best, but we try, there's always kind of speed bumps because it's an all year round program. There's kind of bumps where there's a few deadlines clustered together, and then if they have an extension, then it exacerbates the problem. So they've maybe got 2 or 3 clustering, but then things die down. Yeah, I think you have to. Yeah, you just have to be flexible, don't you? And try and look ahead to those, what the learning journey looks like for them. But yeah, no, fantastic. There's some really good sort of ideas there, and I'll be trying to get a glimpse of your survey templates at some point, I'm sure. So fantastic. There was another question. Another thing that I've been looking at recently as well is like the initial assessment or initial needs assessment. Again, I think there've been some funding sort of changes recently as well around that sort of initial assessment can be kind of, you can have budget allocated against it because it is a non-trivial task. It is important.
Yeah.
And we're still figuring that out, I think, as many providers are, I think. But have you found any particular kind of effective ways of tackling that part of the process, that initial assessment? And then are you finding any good ways that that's then informing their journey, and then you're kind of, I don't know, are they reflecting back on that initial assessment and share any good tips and tricks?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, initial assessment, and again, because it's changed again quite significantly this year, from August onwards, in terms of the funding rules and how that recognised prior learning will be calculated, and then the impact that then has on funding. I think this is going to be something that maybe rumbles on quite a lot this year, to be honest. I mean, I've always used, right back from starting work, 14 years ago, I've always used a skills scan. It's never been called anything else other than a skills scan. And it's always been aligned to the knowledge, skills and behaviours. And there's always been this historic issue that it doesn't matter how many instructions you give to the apprentice about this skills scan, they still think it's a test. They still think it's an entry test. and it's really, I don't know why. I honestly can't answer the question, but for some reason they think it's a test and they can't get into their heads to actually score low on it as
Yeah.
opposed to high on it.
Well, it's interesting.
And
I've come
yeah,
across similar. We don't. Yeah, we not so bad on our programs, but I know you mentioned about senior leader, and I've spoken to others
mm,
that run senior leader program, and I think it seems at that level, those doing masters, and I think there's a common problem on maybe even that program. I'm sure other programs where they
yeah,
feel like they're meant to be leaders, they're meant to be performing, they're in management. The last thing they want to be doing is saying they're not good enough in some of the roles. So they'll want to say, yeah, I'm 5 out of 5, I'm 10 out of 10 on all of these. Otherwise,
yeah.
I wouldn't be qualified to do my job. But then that kind of defeats the whole purpose of the skill scan and the apprenticeship, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's quite a difficult, it's very, I mean, we've just recently implemented a couple of different new procedures in terms of how to calculate it. We've always had the academics conduct an interview with prospective candidates as they come on board, and then they have an additional sort of an initial tripartite, if you like, with our support officers that pick up again what's been said in the interview. They pick up what's been said on the skills scan and various other documents, the application form and what they've put on there as their prior qualifications. How effective that is, I would say it's fairly effective, but it's very time consuming. Um, there's an awful lot of work that goes right into the beginning of those programs before the learner is even on board, before they've even started. There are a lot of hours. And so it is good that initial assessment has now been put as an eligible cost. But again, I don't think there's any tool out there. We use sort of various different RPL calculators, but none of them are. I've never found one that really solves the issue. And I think what it is that a general skills scan just purely gives you the knowledge, skills, and behaviour statements. But again, dependent on the apprenticeship standards, they can feel like they're written in a different language sometimes. And actually, it's about providing that extra context around them to get them to understand what it is that's actually asking them to do, and then actually how that then translates down to the individual modules, and actually what will you learn on this module. But then that's a very either lengthy document or a very lengthy conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that the formula that we've sort of tried to adopt using the funding rules, it makes perfect sense to me personally in terms of how to reduce the funding, but it still doesn't really fully answer how you get to that decision in terms of what equates to a reduction of 10. Who am I to say, well, you're currently a finance manager, so I'm going to deduct all of the hours from that module, or I'm only going to deduct 10 hours from that module. There's no real, unless you spent several hours sitting down with the learner well prior to the start date with the actual module specification, which in the best of worlds that's not going to happen, then it is very, very difficult to get that figure right. And actually, when we looked at our programs and we looked at the number of taught hours and then the additional hours that go against that, they come out well above the minimum off the job requirement, which is fine. But then it's then finding that finer balance between, okay, this is what the learner will need in order to actually achieve that work. But I'm never going to sell that qualification if I say to that employer, I need them 3 days a week. So it's, so it is quite difficult. But there needs to be that form of initial assessment, and there are various different things out there that not just look at the maths and English, but all the prior qualifications as well.
Yeah, that's it. It's a multifaceted sort of process, isn't it? Or at least it should be. I mean, but like you say, a skill scan form is kind of a good kind of stepping stone, a good component, right? I've had other conversations that with others that it's like that form plus a conversation is kind of necessary to pick up on So almost in my mind, and this is something we're still refining, that you should go through that form with the learner and then adjust it as needed, particularly in those cases where they put 5 out of 5 for all of them or 10 out
Yeah,
of 10.
absolutely. You're right. It's just a component. It's really one cog in a far bigger mechanism in terms of in trying to sort of ascertain exactly what it is that they've done. And certainly at HE level, at level 6 and 7, a lot of our learners come with quite a high prior attainment as well, which again is good in one respect, but again from an initial assessment point of view, okay, what have you achieved, and how much does that translate across to the new apprenticeship?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and it will never be easy, will it?
No.
We haven't signed up for an easy life getting into the apprenticeship
Definitely
space.
not. Definitely not. It goes back to
Totally
that
worth
collaboration again.
it. Totally worth it. No, well, I think that's one thing. One thing I have been trying to look at Trestle, although it is on the back burner at the moment, was a very basic initial needs assessment tool based on the KSBs, effectively a skill scan, based on the KSBs and apprenticeship standard. With then, as talking to more people, there's a couple of other questions that are useful to have in there which we kind of do at the moment on a Word document kind of form, making sure they understand what they're signing up to, and a couple of points around that side of things, which then is completed before an initial interview, which at the moment I sort of carry out as program lead, and you can kind of pick that apart. And but there's still refinements to be made. But I think the beauty of a skills scan that you can then refer back to, right, and then update periodically, so you can demonstrate growth over time, like visually, and even for the learner's benefit, and for the for the education, the institution's benefit, and for Ofsted's benefit, demonstrating that transparency. I think that's multiple benefits. That's what I want to get to. And I know there are solutions out there. It's just often they're quite difficult to get set up and running. That's a goal of mine as well. But we'll see how we get on with that.
Absolutely, and like you say, repeating them. I don't think that is done enough actually. And again, it's trying to get away from it feeling like a tick box exercise. It isn't. It is genuinely to try and ascertain how far they've come, and the difference between the starting point and where they are now.
That's it, and demonstrating that growth over time, I think, can be a useful, positive, kind of psychological, aspect to the learners, but also feeding it into the EPA, right? They have to be growing over time to be ready for EPA, and I know there's encouragement. The general encouragement is, learners should be aware and kind of know about EPA from day zero, and so if you have a mechanism, or if you have forms, even if it is just forms or processes that follow that thread all the way through, that's when benefit comes, right? But if they are just isolated checkbox exercises, they're potentially less than useless, right? They actually take up time. They kind of can distract learners. They don't understand why they're doing it, which can have a negative impact. So
Absolutely,
it's just so important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we're all working on trying to refine those processes. I mean, a final point. I thought let's end on something positive. Well, it's positive anyway. It's been a positive chat, but like any success stories that you sort of come to your mind, either from previous roles or current roles, just about how transformational kind of apprenticeships can be for the learners, but either in their personal or professional life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been numerous success stories. I think every apprentice that goes through is a success, but I think there's been numerous over the years where, regardless of the level, I've personally, when I was an assessor, I've delivered level 2 qualifications and then gone back to the same employer, and that person's then achieved a level 3, and just seeing not just the increase in knowledge, but the confidence that these people have got, or you've seen them move right the way through to sort of management roles or things like that, and just the progression in their career, and that for me is fantastic. Or they've had an apprenticeship, and then before really degree apprenticeships really got off the ground, seeing apprentices sort of complete level 2, level 3, and then you suddenly sort of meet them again a few years down the line, and they've gone to university because they've got that confidence and they've got that pathway now. And I had sort of learners from years ago that worked with children, and they've now gone on to things like midwifery or pediatric nursing, or they've gone into the teaching fields, and it's fantastic to see where that initial apprenticeship has taken those people. But from a HEI point of view, our apprentices are always commenting on how amazed they are that it's those, again, really going back to those initial assessment things, really, they don't know what they don't know, but when they do find out what they don't know, and then how they use that in their own work setting, it's great to hear that. You hear of some really transformational stuff going on, and things that they've embedded with their teams, or whole staff of people, and really genuinely using the projects that they're doing as part of their apprenticeship as a real work-life changing of a process. I think is great, and just, I think just being in the HEI space now, it's really encouraging. I mean, actually, the last couple of days, I've seen an awful lot around sort of social media and LinkedIn and things about apprenticeships being delivered at universities, and there's still that stigma there. There's still that stigma that well, I can't do an apprenticeship, or I can't go to university, or even I can't, I don't think I can do an apprenticeship at a university, like it would be different. So actually, the opportunities that a lot of our apprentices have now been given because they've been able to go back and do a degree apprenticeship. I wish I'd been able to do a degree apprenticeship years ago. When I first started to move into management, I wish it was something available then, because I'd have jumped at the chance, rather than coming out to go back. So I think the opportunities that apprenticeships present to anybody in any job role at any stage of their lives, is fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's a great summary, I think, and I would echo those sentiments. I think that the time that we're recording this, not sure when it'll be published, but when we're recording it, it's A-level results time, isn't it?
It is. So
there's lots of expectations of people, getting into university, etc. But I think I saw some. I think degree apprenticeships are still they are still second-class citizens, aren't they? They're second-class.
They are.
Kind of options. I think there is work being done. I think I spoke to a fantastic careers advisor whose degree apprenticeships is one of her. She's a great proponent of those, and the examples of learners who have university or the traditional university approach just hasn't been for them, but actually they've then gone on to achieve first class degrees through degree apprenticeship programs and benefited from the experience, not just getting that paper, that first class degree, but the fact that they've got that work based experience. When I look at these degree apprenticeships, it's like a degree on steroids. And you don't have to pay for it. It's just it's almost, one wonders if it's almost because they're too good to be true that people don't realize. It's like, well, that can't be real. Like we have to pay for a degree, otherwise it's not really a degree. The mind boggles, doesn't it? But I think just making enough noise about it, trying to make more noise, and I suppose is something that we can contribute.
Absolutely.
And hopefully this podcast helps. But we're all in it, all talking about it. I think it's also employer led, isn't it? I think that's what in our position we can only teach apprentices if they are in a role and they have an employer. And really, it's those forward-thinking employers that have created those academies or those degree apprenticeship cohorts alongside graduate cohorts that are driving this forward.
Absolutely, and it's still very. I don't know if disappointing is the right word. Probably not, but it's still very surprising, maybe, that we are sort of quite a way on from the apprenticeship levy having been launched, and I still to this day come across employers that don't know what I'm talking about when I mention that the apprenticeship levy or the apprenticeship service, and these are large levy paying employers that since 2018 have not utilised it. So it's still, I still find that quite surprising that that's the case, and how can we, there's very much, employers are behind it, employers are the voice of it, employers design them, but when you see how much money is still sort of unspent, or businesses that aren't utilising it, then I would argue that's not the case, and there's still probably quite a lot of work to be done to get employers on board.
Yeah, very much so. Anecdotally as well, I've had some instances where large employers, they feel like they don't want the hassle of going through the apprenticeship levy route, but they will still fund degrees for their staff.
Yeah,
just fund it, which is a real shame. And it ties in with the figure that I think was promoted recently, like 3 billion or something, that has been not unspent levy over since the beginning of the levy was introduced. So lots of potential on the table that's kind of gone back unspent. But I think we keep going. I think generally apprenticeships are growing. I think degree apprenticeships are generally moving forward. I think, I know my focus being on digital apprenticeships, there's that great focus on the digital skills gap. Keeping on pushing and talking to those open-minded employers that want to grow those programs. We just keep doing what we can do, I guess.
That's it.
Well, thanks so much, Jane, for the chat today. Really enjoyed it. Lots of good stuff in there.
Thank you.
I'm sure the listeners will benefit greatly. I know I have. So thank you for the pearls of wisdom. So I hope the rest of your day goes okay, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you.